Hi, I'm Peter Haddock, and welcome to a special European edition of Inside Edge, brought to you by Ritchie Brothers, the leading global marketplace for insights, services, and transition solutions for the equipment industry. With so much happening in the rental industry, with digitalization and modernization, we have compiled a very special panel of experts with a long track record for the rental sector to talk to you about the challenges and opportunities of modernizing rental fleet management. My expert panel is made up of Guy Kramer, the Chief Procurement Officer of Bulls Rentals. Guy joined the business in 1989, so he has more than 30 years rental equipment experience. Please say hello to the audience, Guy.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you, Guy. And Guy is joined by Alex Schussler, and he is the founder and president of International Group at Smart Equip. The business centers around easy and fast acquisition of spare parts, getting downed machines back to work faster. Please say hello to the audience, Alex.
Thank you, Peter. Very nice to be here. Hello, everybody.
And of course, our final member and panel guest is Phil Mouse, the Managing Director of Rouse Services, which today provides rate and utilization benchmarking to over 280 rental companies and dealers across North America and the United Kingdom. Please say hello to the audience, Phil.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks, Peter.
And of course, today wouldn't be a great panel without a very special guest. I'm joined by Belinda Smart, the editor of industry-leading magazine, International Rental News. It's been supporting the sector for over 20 years, and she's going to help me kick off the panel discussion by highlighting some of those industry challenges and, of course, opportunities that we face now and into the future. So, folks, if you also have any specific questions to ask the panel, please drop them into the questions section. Over to you, Belinda.
Thank you, Peter. Hello, everybody. Yes, I've been with International Rental News for a year now, but the magazine has been around for a lot longer than that, and I'm very happy to share with you the latest developments in digitalization in the European rental industry as seen by IRN. If I could have the first slide, please. Thank you. So the rise of online rental solutions. This is a key development in the industry. Obviously, this is accelerated quite significantly because of the pandemic. We've seen a big uptake of on-demand online services in society as a whole, and the rental industry is no exception. One area that's we're seeing a lot of interesting developments is in the area of apps. And that's across the board from smaller companies to major international ones. So one example is a Switzerland-based company, Avesco, which recently launched its Fast Rent app. This app is making waves because it's changed the way the business operates. It's now completely paperless, and it offers a range of activities in the rental sector, from invoicing to stock checking, that's all been digitalized. Going to one of the world leaders, Sunbelt in North America, has recently launched an app, a customer app, which enables the entire rental experience to be completed in a digital platform. And that's anything from locating equipment to organizing contracts. So obviously that's resulted in huge efficiency gains for those businesses. If I can have the next slide, please. Thank you. So fleet tech efficiencies, obviously that's critical to the conversation we're having today. And a key driver for this, obviously, is a fairly buoyant rental market despite the pandemic. We've seen a rebound in 2021, followed by predictions of quite strong activity going forward. At the same time, a very strong squeeze from the supply side, as we know, with supply chain delays really affecting the industry, this has meant that utilization is an absolute premium, more now than ever before, really. So a key area for this, obviously, is in the telematics space. And we have players like Track Unit, which is making headlines at the moment. It's made a number of strategic acquisitions and partnerships in recent times. And the company now has, at last count, over 1 million connected units of equipment globally on construction sites. It also offers end users something very useful, which is obviously a unified platform in which they can see all their equipment, all their machinery, regardless of brand or manufacturer, which is obviously hugely useful. If I could have the next slide, thank you. So what are the gains of digitalization? As mentioned, we're talking about companies of all shapes and sizes engaging in digitalization. Bulls Rental, which is a leader in the European space, has reported that during the pandemic, it remarks on a huge uptick in online business. The company's also been engaging in a process of refining and streamlining its digital infrastructure, particularly in the area of data around product that allows it to manage and track a product in a much more efficient way than previously. And that's obviously an ongoing project for a major company like Bulls, and just one element of what it's doing. But the key message there is about efficiency and growth. And growth is key for a company. One example, which is a Finland-based company, Renter Group, which interestingly is a digital-first company. It has a whole range of apps. One of them is a customer-facing app called Renter Easy, but that's supported by a suite of internal apps that reflect all elements of its business. And Renter has been very open in saying that it would not have been able to expand as rapidly as it has done. It's now in most of the Nordic states. It's also expanded into Poland and has its eyes on further expansion in Europe. It certainly would not have been able to achieve that kind of level of rapid expansion without an easily scalable digital business model. So that's obviously critical. And then obviously, last but certainly not least, sustainability is a huge driver for digitalization in the rental space. And one example of that is Denmark-based company GSV, which is the biggest rental player in Denmark. It's actually just been recently purchased by Kilu2 in France. And it's said that it would not have been able to reach its sustainability goals without being digitalized. By being able to have an overview of its fleet, it's been able to really reduce its downtime by about half, and obviously that's resulted in a commensurate reduction in emissions and wastage. So that's of critical importance, obviously, at the moment for rental businesses. So those are just some of the trends we're noticing at International Rental News, and obviously we'll be continuing to look at that as time goes on. And now it gives me great pleasure to hand over to the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Belinda. That's great. It's fascinating to hear what you're reporting on there at International Rental News. And there's certainly a lot to talk about. So to make sure we get as much out of the panel as possible, I'd like to kick off with the topic of driving KPIs with Guy. And I'd like to start, Guy, with understanding what are the new technology developments at the moment that people have got to look out for. Guy.
Okay, it's a lot on the market at the moment, and to be honest, at the beginning you're getting a lot of data. Then you have to slice it or into 3 containers, I say. First, you can see there's all the data for who is it. You have to look what data do I become and to whom is it useful. So first we say it's for the rental as an owner, the equipment owner, so it doesn't need to be a rental company, but also for other big fleet owners. And then they see what they gonna drive, what is driving their company. So for us, that's going back to the basic. It's all about availability and uptime of equipment. Only when equipment is available, we can make money, and we can help our customers. And therefore, you'd have all those systems what you can add on.
Yeah, Guy, you were just talking about sustainability. I think that is an important topic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's becoming more and more a topic. And with the data, what we can, let's say, when the machines are start talking to you, they can, we can help them to be more efficient. And at the end, this will save also the operating cost of the user. That's today our customer.
So fleet sustainability is really important topic for you. And, you know, how does it really come into play when you're looking at the tools and the processes? And, you know, obviously your customers want you to be able to show them how you measure it as well. So can you give me a little bit of an insight into that, what they're asking for and how you're giving them the information on that?
Oh, this can be on several ways. For us, it's to show them, are they using it and is it available? And let's say what equipment is available on their project. So sometimes you can connect even their equipment to our platform, and that we can see what's the best way for them, if they should use their own or they should rent another one.
So really, you're not just saying you're renting them equipment, you're saying you can actually pull in their equipment to your platform so that they can see all the data. And what kind of data are we talking about, Guy, here? We're looking about fuel utilization, other things? What kind of things are people seeing now?
Even when you're talking on tools, you can talk about, let's say, the trigger time. How long does it work? And if it works, is it working efficient? And that comes back to running hours. So you have to calculate this for them and where they can make their savings. Fuel is one of them. Yes, everybody knows them already in the industry. I think that's the idle time and so on. But I think it's going much further than only idle time in the equipment.
So you're talking about lots of different other things like safety implications as well and notifications. And so how does that help people actually measure their carbon footprint and become greener then? How are you using that data to actually get people into that greener space?
Yeah, actually, if they know what the machines are doing, they know how much energy they are using. And also, let's say you have to into account that also the logistic part behind this. How often are you driving to a job site? So it's really following the equipment and how often does it move.
And Guy, that really takes you on to the equipment itself, doesn't it? Obviously, we mentioned in the introduction, 700,000 items that you actually have across Europe as a business, all being monitored by your teams. So that obviously gives you a lot of insights about fleets, when to replace equipment, when to dispose of it, and which equipment is performing better in different applications. So how are you using that technology to drive sort of better decision making from your perspective? And also you're seeing, as you said earlier, your client stuff coming in at the same time in similar equipment. It must be fascinating. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's a good question. Yes, it's difficult because let's say all over Europe, so we have different environments. Even if we do the same job, it can be different data coming out of if you are digging in sand or you are digging in rocks, for example. And then you have to look to the segmentations of your clients. So even if they're using the same machine, it can be really, really different. If you are using access machines for washing windows, it's totally different when you're building big holes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess when you're looking at that data and you're looking at the sort of utilization, and people would normally say, oh, we change it every 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But how is that information helping you sort of make the decision to dispose, or actually say it's better for us to invest and change that cycle time?
Actually, the people are telling the people. It's like people. Equipment is like people. They start telling you how they feel and in what shape they are, and if they are still happy to run, and if they so that makes it easier to make a decision. Do I gonna do big investments on the machine? Do I do the big repairs on that? It goes back to the TCO. And that's where we start still to calculate and where we make our purchase decisions.
And that really quite leads us quite nicely, Guy, to actually Alex, because those decision-making processes are very important, and with businesses like yours, very swift. So it relates to the costs of maintenance and repair of equipment. And Alex, that's very much part of your business and what you do. So when does that moment happen where you're coming into play with the sort of decreasing repair time, or uptime increasing because of that? How does it all work and come together?
That's an interesting question. We often get so we are seen in many different ways by the technology we present is seen under many different facets. And it's interesting how the technology world has split. That sometimes leads to confusion. So, for example, there are a lot of procurement systems out there, and everybody thinks of procurement as something that organizes your spend. It reduces your amount of spend by making sure that you're going to the preferred suppliers, vendors, that you're getting the best pricing and so forth. And quite often, there's such a almost maniacal focus on those kinds of indicators that you're really missing the operational picture. And I'll give you an example. About 3% of a typical rental company's spend, and Guy, correct me wrong, but 3% of fleet value, original cost fleet value per year is being spent on parts, typically on spare parts. And so the idea is, well, maybe we can reduce that by 5%, 10%, meaning 5% or 10% of the 3%. But as people go down that road, they often discover, well, wait a minute, that's only part of the story. An equally expensive part, another 3.5%, is being spent on service. And one way to define service is attaching those parts to the equipment to make sure it runs, right? So you're looking at that. And then you recognize, well, wait a minute, if we really do this right, let's look at operational efficiency, not just the transactional one. Transactional being the savings that you might get from automating your purchasing, your procurement, but really that there's a much more significant operational side. If I can save 2 hours of repair every time I order a part, that's significantly higher than getting that part for 3-5% less on the market. But the biggest one, and this has really been a shift, especially over the last 5 years, everybody talks about uptime. And the most interesting part in all of this is if you can reduce the amount of time you take for a service, that by definition means if I can reduce my repair time by 4 hours or 8 hours, that means that that equipment is available for these additional 4 or 8 hours. So if you start ranking all of these and look at what the impact of procurement technology has been in the industry, even though there's been a procurement focus, the significantly larger impact has really been on the operational side. A, we reduce the cost of service by streamlining repairs, and B, every time we do that, automatically, as an automatic side effect or consequence, that equipment is available a great deal more, and that tends to be the highest value impact of getting your procurement right, interestingly enough.
Now, Guy, Alex did ask you the question there. It is important that these percentage points have added up already in Alex's discussion. How are you seeing that? Because if you can make a saving of 1%, it's bottom line stuff, I guess, for you.
It is, but I want to add something because actually Alex is starting in the middle of a process. And we're talking today about the digitalization and the data and the telematics. actually the machine will tell you before it comes in a workshop, before the people are start to look what they need to repair, to replace. The machine will tell you more or less that it needs a service. So actually, at that point, you can make your arrangement, and then you can start already to order the right equipment and the right parts. So when the machines are coming in, the parts are already more or less waiting. So there we can save also a lot of time already. And then, of course, by smart equipment, yes, when we look back, it has, I believe, 21 touch points in the company. So it's not a big saving in one point, but it's savings on 21 points during the process. That's together, that is I think the big advantage.
Thank you very much, Guy. Alex, I think what Guy's really alluding to there is the democratization and accessibility of software and data, so that you can share that information across the different platforms with customers and get that immediate machine talking to you guys. So how, in your experience, has this sort of changed, this technology changed over the last sort of couple of years and decades even? And what are the pivotal points that are allowing us to have this kind of conversation?
I think, democratization is actually a very good word for this. And there are two very different things that are coming together. So when we normally think about the democratization of technology, we think back, we started our company 22 years ago, which in technology terms is about 6 centuries. But when we began to run technology, not just like ours, but really even a rental management system and so forth, the first thing you needed was a data center. That's expensive. You needed servers, you needed clean power, you needed a raised floor so that you would be static free, and all these other things, which would quickly get into millions of euros, and which by definition meant that unless you were a very large firm with great IT budget and personnel and so forth, much of this technology was not available to you. And then about 15 years ago, I remember, some people may remember, something called ASP came along. There were application service providers, and that allowed slightly smaller companies or mid-sized companies to get in by not doing all of this themselves, but they would find data centers that would manage all of this for them. They would be the ones to actually buy the application, again, quite often in the 7 digits, and then rent it back to you, and they would do all of this. And that sort of expanded the footprint and allowed smaller companies to participate as well. And then after that, the real revolution, to our minds, came when everything became SaaS. So you could no longer have to find somebody to run and maintain and amortize the whole thing for you. You could actually just go ahead and rent your application. And everybody knows about Salesforce. In the industry, Smart Equip is known for this. What you do is you really basically start subscribing to the service. And so if you think of Salesforce, you can either buy 5 licenses or 5,000 licenses or anything in between, and you pay by these licenses. And that's where we are for the most part, although that's changing now again, but that's where we are today. And it really allows the smallest of companies with 1 location, 2 location now to get a lot of the technology that previously was reserved for the companies with 300, 400, 500 locations and done. What's really interesting to see now, there's another shift underway. And
well, Alex, one thing before you go into that,
yeah.
This element that you're talking about with the rental businesses able to come in and get the technology, like you're saying, that is allowing people to do things differently and as a smaller business. So, but the gaps are there still with that, aren't they? So there's technology right now, but what do you think are going to be the sort of changes to that, or are there going to be bigger changes to that now?
Well, I think part of the reason we use the term democratization, or I'm assuming that that's why you used it, is because it's now giving access to these technologies among small companies that previously would not have had it. So that's a very big part. And the business model keeps shifting because the technology is enabling these kinds of access to happen. And what's happening right now is a lot of these companies are coming back and say, look, let's take it a step further. let's partner up and charge us by the value that we provide on a per transaction basis. So there's a lot of that coming in, it's seeping in. But I think what you're alluding to here is the other element of the democratization, which is, and this is something where Bools again has been a tremendous example and showcase of doing this. And I'll give you a very specific example. You cannot use your purchasing system, your purchase order system, to buy something that is not already entered in it. It's called an item master. It has to be in there. It has to have a price to it. And if you live in the world of parts, which all of us in some form or another do, we know that part numbers, part IDs keep changing by the moment. And so typically what happens is you have large departments, and I know that Bools used to have a very large department for that, of people that did nothing but upload new item master files from all of these people that they were purchasing from. And then if you take a step back, you say, well, wait a minute, why? Because if I'm buying a part from a scissor lift manufacturer that has now introduced a new part and I don't yet have it in my system, we know that at some point they had to add it to theirs. So here the democratization is really, we're taking down the walls. So if you want to buy something that's not yet in your system, but somebody else has entered it in theirs, there is a way to trigger a transfer. And I think when you walk to Bools, for example, you notice that all of the suppliers that Bools has in this world, they're not just suppliers of machines, suppliers of parts, suppliers of service support. They're now actually becoming your data managers, because every time they have an update in their system, Bools automatically inherits that system in theirs through the connection that they get through SmartEquip in this case.
Now, Guy, that is really interesting, changing your department to be more collaborative and integrated, isn't it? That is obviously working well for you.
That's true, and there's another advantage. As you mentioned in the beginning, we are based in 19 countries. So if you go back to the mechanics in Poland, in Czech, and so on, because you're really connected to the system of the OEM, they did already the translations also. So this is also helping to have a clean database, and it's always up to date. If they make the change at the OEM, it's change all over the world. So immediately, more or less in our system, because we are direct connected.
And that's really important. I think it also leads nicely, Guy, yet again, you've managed to do it, onto the next sort of part of the discussion panel here, because, you know, what's really important for me is we've seen a lot of the way in which you're working at Bools and the way in which Alex is integrating there. But I want to bring Phil in now. Phil, you have really been looking at data and looking at insights for a long time now. You know, we're seeing this integration. It really does show the impact of technology when you can gather information and share it and make it relevant to different countries, to different spaces. And you've been doing that, and it's been giving you the opportunity to give people of all different levels, small to large businesses, insights. So data's great, but it's insights we need that can measure and improve the rental market's value proposition. Can you tell us and explain us a little bit about how that's working and how that's become a big driver?
Sure. So what we've been working with rental companies in North America on over sort of the past 20 years now is really aggregating data from all these different players in the industry and then enabling them to understand how their pricing, utilization, and used equipment values and recoveries compare to benchmarks that we calculate based on all the data we're collecting. So we build these data connections and collect, about $70 billion worth of fleet nightly, a little over 3 million individual assets, 27 billion in rental transaction volume, and 20 billion in used equipment sale transaction volume. And then we can play back to each company at the value of their fleet, so what it's worth today based on a mark to market that we've done using the transactional data we're collecting from everybody else, as well as how their pricing and utilization compares to their local market. So they can better understand their value proposition, their market positioning, and what's happening to industry supply.
And so, Phil, what's really interesting about that, and Guy, I'm coming back to you again, is actually we've just said you've realized your system's telling you your machines are literally costing you too much money to maintain. So that's the time when you want to actually know the value of them, isn't it? So again, having that data coming in, how important is that to you to then, look at the way in which you can manage your fleet, your 700,000 assets?
Yeah, it's a very good question. But to be honest, if you want to be in the rental industry and you want to calculate a decent and a fair rental price, how do you do that? So if you don't know all the cost of the equipment, that you have it in your possession, it's impossible to make a good rental price. So that's why we say you need to be an expert and need all to know the data for the calculated TCO. And a big part of the TCO is the resale value. And the other one, it's when does the cost are coming up. And that's not why we are afraid of cost if we have to change an undercarriage of a big excavator. It tells you how long do I need to keep it. So for all those calculations, the resale value and let's say the data what Rouse can or is spreading out, that's very important for us.
And that is really what you're doing, Phil, though. You are actually spreading out now, because you were in the States, and a lot of those customers in the States, have worked with you, and now you're just part of the fabric of the rental sector in the States. And you're coming into Europe now. You've obviously had a lot of time with key learnings for businesses taking advantage of those data-led insights. What are the things you can share with people from your experience of the US market and how that relates to the European listeners that we've got today?
Well, I think what we've observed as we've started to work with European rental companies is that, outside of a couple of the leading players like Bools, we're sort of just getting up the analytics adoption curve as it relates to these things and topics like total cost of ownership, pricing, fleet management. And the challenge is many of the smaller rental companies in Europe, sort of similar to what we saw in the US, 5 or 10 years ago, really are managing everything in Excel spreadsheets. And when you think about something like comparing brand A to brand B, it's not a comparison they can do well because they don't have good make model taxonomy data in their system. So they might have, a Caterpillar 320D spelled 4 different ways. So there's no way to easily look at all the Caterpillar 320Ds and compare those to the comparable, Komatsu or Hitachi model or JCB. So, I think most of the rental software systems collect all of the data that you need to make these decisions. But what they don't do is cleanse that data, normalize it, and then deliver it back to rental companies in a way that enables them to analyze the data and really understand, to Guy's point, the total cost of ownership, which is critical to running an effective rental business. And so, we're seeing in Europe that we're just starting to get up that analytics adoption curve as an industry. Companies like Bools and other large players are doing it, but I think there's an enormous opportunity for the small and mid-sized companies in Europe to better leverage data and insights to understand these problems and truly get to figure out, okay, what's the right time to sell this asset? What's my total cost of ownership? How should I think about my pricing and asset deployment? I think there's a huge opportunity there.
Now, Alex, I think, this is where you guys have really got a part to play within that middle piece. And I think, for me, you've got the understanding and the support that you can give to people to understand how you can get the parts for things. Because let's be honest, at the moment, we've had problems with deliveries. People have had to start putting it more effort into maintaining their old fleets. But again, comes back to that cost structure, doesn't it? Getting that cost structure right of parts, but also of the labor and the effort that goes in, and then looking at the data from Phil to say, well, if I do put all that effort in, am I going to get more for my machine when I'm getting rid of it, or am I actually going to be able to keep things going because I'm able to source the right parts. It's a big complex element, isn't it? But I guess you're going to tell me it's quite simple.
Well, of course it's simple. No, actually, but there is it's not simple, but it's right at our doorstep. And the reason I say that with confidence is the elements are already existing. And I'll give you an example. To me, the most interesting thing that's happening in the world right now in technology is not necessarily the new stuff that's coming along, although some of it, and I know it's a cliche, but some of what's happening in machine learning and so forth is really great. We're not just learning whether the machine is operating correctly or not, but the more we study that data, the more data the machine puts out, the more we find out what's going on and under what conditions it tends to fail. So that's all the machine learning world, and that's, I think, the big frontier that's starting to throw out value. But leaving that aside, I think the biggest advances come from now putting together the elements that we're all using already. And to your example specifically, and really what Phil implied and what Guy spoke about, the ideal world and the components, as I said, are there. The ideal world is where, as the repair happens, the technician uses a system such as SmartEquip to evaluate quickly what is required, what's the cost of the repair, both labor and parts, to your point specifically, and at the same time have intersecting with that moment the world that Phil is describing, which is, and by the way, today that machine is worth X if you were to sell it. So you now have a dynamically determined repair or replace decision that you can make, that you can almost automate at that time. And what's really interesting, and I'm hoping to make Guy laugh with this is a very, very different world where when you could be in the middle of a rental and a CFO walks up to you and says, by the way, get that machine back, we need to sell it. And then the question is why? And they will tell you, because this is where our book value is today. This is not a book value world anymore. This is not about depreciation it is about a dynamic world where pricing continuously changes. And you referred to the world we're in now, which is where supply chain issues and so forth exist. It's still the same metrics. It's still the same intersection of these data flows. It's just that the value parameters have changed to reflect that new machines are expensive or hard to come by. Used machines are expensive, hard to come by. So you will probably defer the replacement aspect of it and go more into main. But the data streams that you need to constantly make those decisions dynamically are the same ones. So really it is take the elements, take the technology that is out there, and now start having it intersect at the moment when it's most required.
And that is the most important thing that Guy has actually got as a task in his role, because fundamentally your role, Guy, within Bulls is about connecting all of this together so that you can become more profitable and, let's be honest, better for your customers because you're making the right decisions. And that all involves the purchasing decisions of every aspect of your business, doesn't it? So when we're talking about putting these puzzle pieces together, what is actually been happening with you over that period, and how do you think it's impacted both your own profitability and your ability to service your customers?
It's really difficult sometimes to combine this, and even if you're having such a wide range of products, because everything is specific. So earth moving is different from axis is different from tools, not to speak about side huts, for example. So it's really, you need a complete team where everyone in that team is an expert, if it's comes to the technical part or to the usage. But it's totally right that you have to combine those things. But in the rental industry, the first thing what we have to do is to say it's available. So I think this is the dynamic what Alex was describing. There's always, the whole day you have to make a decision. Is the new one coming in? Yes or no? I need it tomorrow, so I have to repair it. And when I repair it, till what cost? So again, if I put a very huge repair in it and to sell it to the market value of tomorrow, it's still a used machine. So to earn that big investment back, you start to calculate that you have to keep it for the next 2 years, for example. So there's no easy answer on that, Peter. It's hard work for a whole team.
Absolutely, and I think it probably means that you have alluded to that. You've got to have different people coming into the rental industry that are going to be able to manage these systems and manage these insights that are coming in, and then that's a skilling element as well. And Phil, I'm going to come back to you on this. You know, it's actually about providing the right information to the right person in Guy's business that's responsible for the right sector, that's responsible for the maintenance and the elements over here for Alex. That's really complex, and yet there are dashboard abilities to do that, aren't there? And that's what allows you to drill down. That's the next important part of the insight, isn't it? Sending the right information to people. Give us an example of what you're doing, Phil.
Yeah, so I think, you know, if you think about it, there's, and life cycle management in particular, if you take, you know, a scissor lift, for example, in North America, you might be able to get 40% of your original cost annually in rental revenue, somewhere between 40 and 45. And if you sell that piece of equipment when it's 7, 8, 9 years old, you might get 50% of what you originally paid for. So, you know, over the course of that life cycle, you're making 40% a year in rental, you sell it for 50%, it's a pretty nice return. Now, you do also have to manage the parts cost, the labor cost to maintain that piece of equipment. But as I shared, it can be a pretty nice return. Now, that decision point of when to sell shifts dynamically in response to these supply chain issues. So you have to sort of serve this information up to a fleet manager to enable them to understand, you know, the residual value curve, the fleet profile. And the other thing you have to take into account is how long is it going to take them to replace that machine, which in this environment today is the variable that's driving all of these decisions. Because normally you might sell an asset when it's 7 or 8 years old, but if I know, hey, I can't get one of these for 6 or 12 months, then I'm going to hang on to the ones I have so they keep earning rental revenue while I'm waiting for the replacement machine. So I think delivering all that information dynamically to the decision maker at the time they're making the decisions about what to order and what to dispose of is kind of the key to enabling better fleet management.
Now, folks, we're talking a lot about data today, and but obviously we know in the European sector in particular that we've got a lot of issues around GDPR, data protection, and there are big concerns for players at every level. So, you know, you're talking a lot about data, Phil. Maybe I'll come back to you on this particular point. But how can individual businesses in the industry address the sort of data protection issues around all this sharing and all this information floating around in these systems?
So I'd say the most important thing for any business to do to comply with GDPR is don't collect any data that you don't need that's personally identifiable, because it's only going to increase your risk exposure and really your risk in the event of a data breach that you'll have to report and be liable for the information. So that's probably the most important part, I think, of complying with GDPR, but also hosting your data in a cloud solution provider. And there are a lot of great ones out there, Amazon, Microsoft, Google. They've all invested, you know, in some cases, billions of dollars in tools to enable you to comply with these rules. So any provider you use, or any, you know, rental software company, solutions provider, should be hosting their data there so that they can leverage that best-in-class built-in infrastructure for GDPR compliance.
So, Alex, you know, you've already mentioned that in your previous conversation. Would you reiterate what Phil said there? How important is it?
Well, Phil, I think, is exactly right. Starting with his last point, which is the infrastructure. You know, it's a little bit similar to what I said in the very beginning. 20 years ago, you had to build a data center and do all this stuff and clean rooms and everything else. That was a massive cost, and then the world shifted to give everybody access to that. And what Phil described is very similar. GDPR was feared to be to have a massive impact cost-wise, but he's exactly right. So cloud data providers such as AWS and others enable you to wrap that privacy in, including all the audits required and so forth. So that does make it easy. There's one other component though, which is, and that goes to Phil's point about retaining the data. What's very interesting is there are a lot of providers, and again, SmartEquip is one of them. We're never a system of record. And so we by nature do not retain data, because what we do is we go to Bools and we look dynamically, or our system looks dynamically within Bools. Behind Bools is firewalls. What machine do I have? What's the model? What's the serial number? And then it dynamically fetches from that particular manufacturer all the service and parts information that pertains to that exact, not just model and make, but serial number, fetches it, shows it, and then gets rid of it. So, and same with the transactions. It really is a form of getting information to travel back and forth. And that's where the efficiency comes from. It does not come from starting massive data storages that you don't need. You need a real-time insight into what's happening, whether it's on the operations of the machine or some transactions surrounding the machine. You don't need a massive library that you retain forever.
And that's why it's so important to have this conversation today, because these are critical points, and working with big players like Bools allows you to make sure that those things work for everybody of all different shapes and sizes. Now, we're drawing quite close to the most important thing, which is our audience, who are already asking some questions, folks. But before I ask you those questions that are coming in, I'd like you to give me a little bit of what's the final thing from your perspective that the audience should be looking out for in 2022, and why? And Guy, I'm going to be coming over to you for this one. 2022 and a little bit beyond you can go, but from your perspective, briefly, what should the audience be looking out for?
I would say today the supply chain, that's the most critical part. If it's new machine or parts, so be very keen on that. And if you normally look, let's say, half a year upfront, now you have to at least look for 1 year. What's I gonna face? What I gonna replace, and start acting like that. And the second one on this, it's that's what we're facing today. Every day there are letters that are coming in. I have to increase the price of the logistics, or the spare parts, everything, labor. So I feel that we have to look very carefully to the OPEX, the operational cost. That would be my recommendation.
Two very good points there, Guy. Thanks very much. Phil, I'm going to come to you next.
Yeah, I'm sort of going to echo what Guy is saying. It's just 2022 is about doing more with less, right? We're in this global supply chain shortage. No one can get equipment, so you have to maximize the value you're getting out of the existing assets you have, and things like maximizing uptime, strategically deploying your assets in the places where they're going to get, the most utilization and the highest return is critically important in 2022, just given the scarcity of equipment that's out there.
And Alex, you're not allowed to use the same thing and agree with the other two, I'm afraid. I'm going to put you on the spot here for something a little bit different from your perspective, please.
We'll add one more thing to what they said, which is it's hard not to agree with this, but it's also interesting to note that there are other places in the world where the same technology is being used, the same KPIs are there, but that traditionally where the rental industries had much longer life cycles. For example, if you go to Japan, where rental penetration is north of 85%, when we do our implementations there, we already are in a world where machines are kept 7, 10, 12 years, and where that total cost of ownership is made up of those components, and everything you can do service, parts, maintenance wise and replenishment wise has a much bigger impact. So I think we can learn from that. But to add something new, I want to go back to something from earlier. I think integration is going to make a big difference, and I'll give you a very simple quick example. We are now in a world where a machine, using Guy's example, can tell you that the oil pressure might be wrong, and it can even tell you, as we go from telematics to IoT, what the likely cause is for that. And so it'll notify the service technician, and that service technician then turns from their telematics system to their procurement system and says, hey, I need this particular part because the machine told me. If we're already there, there's no reason for that person to be sitting in the middle. Have the machine place the order. The systems are there. They're all there. Just integrate them. That's not a difficult integration. In many cases, we're there data-wise. In other cases, we're not, but we will get there and really start thinking about not what's the newest technology, what do we bring in, start working on workflow and how do we bring all these together to drive your operational efficiency.
That's a great point. So if you're a machine and you're choking a bit because you need a new filter, tell me now before you do some damage to the really expensive components. And I guess, Guy, that would be something that you would be relishing there if the machine's saying, sort the little cost out before the big cost happens, isn't it?
Yeah, as I would say we are nearly there.
Fantastic. Right. So I'm come back to you, Guy, because we have one of the questions out from the listeners today. They actually want to know what software you are using at Bulls to bring all this together. I'm taking it to pull in these bits and bobs from Alex and Phil and other providers. What is the software you're using?
And for us, it's the two backbones. It's Inspire for the rental and SAP for the rest. And then we have the add-ons like Smart Equip, the system would be integrated with SAP.
Thank you very much. So that was a quick answer. And Alex, we've got another one from you. Next to supply chain efficiency, how can digital technology drive social and environmental benefits in construction? I really like this question. That's a great question.
Well, you know, it's interesting. And it's one of my favorite questions. We touched on environmental stuff earlier, so let me focus briefly on the social side. It is easy to overlook the social impact of using technology, and specifically when we began, and we would walk into parts departments and service departments of different rental companies. We got such a warm reception because for the very first time, the people that were used to doing a lot of work with wrenches and the like now suddenly had this technology there that actually made them feel very good, including to family members and everything else. And it sounds odd to focus on that, but we were surprised by this over and over again. And so there was a democratization again, I think, for that whole class of users that were now having access to things that were quote unquote cool to use and have a big impact in that. Yeah, we've seen a lot of it.
Well, we've got a similar question, but I think this is more a question for you, Phil, really. I'm going to read it out that it's coming. Can you also ask the panel about the integration with rental software? The data is great, but the more and more my employees have to leave the rental software to look at data, the more likely they will not. Even if they do, it's not efficient having to jump from one database to another. And so, you know, it is about making it simple for the workers that are very busy in the renter sector, isn't it, Phil?
Yeah, I think it's a critical part of any solution, and it's something that, you know, we've spent a lot of time on at Rouse. We've built integrations with 35 different software companies. It hasn't been easy to do. It's been a big time investment. Some like Inspire, by the way, make it much easier than others. But I think the other key is, you know, not just how do you get the information, connect to the software and pull out the information you need for the analytics, but how do you serve it back to the users in a way that's easy through apps and dashboards and APIs. And that's something, you know, again, we've spent a lot of time on here at Rouse, but I think any solution provider has to give rental companies a lot of different options for how they consume data, whether that's in their software, in dashboards, pumping it into tools like Salesforce that they might be using for CRM, or just a mobile app on the field person's phone so they can quickly look at the information they need.
And Guy, this is an important question for you because you're relying on people to integrate, as we've mentioned earlier. But what are you able to do now you've got these sort of integration and dashboards? How are you able to collate all that information and feed it to the right people so that that doesn't happen?
That's, let's say, the difficult part. So this is internally, you have to make your own reports. You don't want to send too much data. You have, first has to ask the right questions. What do I want to know, and what can I do about it? And then you have to go to the right person. So this is how you build up your reports and make the decisions where they are going, and explain them what they can do and what they see.
We've got another one from for you as well, Guy. So what are the key areas to reduce downtime and build a more sustainable future? Another great question.
This comes again also to Rouse. You have to look what's your lifetime inside. So not the lifetime of the equipment, but what's the lifetime, the time that you will keep the equipment in the company, because that's, let's say, the TCO where we are looking for. And then all those things we discussed today are again coming together, but in a different light. So today, sustainability is very important. The equipment is changing. Electrification is coming up. We didn't touch that. We had the stage 5 engines with another, let's say, points with telematics and IoT where it's needed. It's almost a license to operate. You need that. If you don't have this on those machines, it's risky. Cost can bring big cost if you don't listen to that. So these things, you have to look after that very closely. And this means that with those data, what you're going to get is the replacement, which I'm talking of. It's very important, and you have to make your own plan. And again, in this time with the availability of today, that's not easy.
Look, I think we've seen that how important data is today, folks. I think we've seen it from Guy's perspective. We've seen it from Alex and Phil's perspective. We've also heard from Belinda today about all the different people that are doing things differently. I think from my perspective, it's been a really, really insightful chat. We have 1 minute to go. I've just got to say a massive, massive thank you to Guy. Thank you very much, Guy.
Thank you.
To Alex, thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you very much.
To Phil, thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Peter.
And to Belinda, who's just joined us and I know has been listening. Some fantastic insights from you all today. And thank you so much to all of the people that have joined the panel, particularly those that have made the effort to ask those fantastic questions. And as a big thank you to all of those registering, the team at Ritchie Brothers will be sending you information on this topic, including a free market trend report on the rental equipment sector, which is packed full of great information. And of course, the information they'll be sending to you will also include a link to this webinar. So if you enjoyed it, please then share the link with your colleagues. And once again, thank you to Guy, Alex, Phil and Belinda for joining me today. Thanks again to the audience.